One of the primary reasons for resentment in our relationships is having unexpressed and unspoken needs. Too many of us assume that our partner should just know what to do to meet our needs, what we want them to do, what we want them not to do. But we often either say nothing or we express those needs in a way that leads to a fight. Isn't there a better way? There sure is. Get ready as we dive into this episode of Master Your Marriage.
Welcome back to another episode. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. If this is your first time joining the show, welcome, and we thank you for being here. Make sure that while you're here, you hit that subscribe button because we drop new episodes every Wednesday, and you won't want to miss it.
Also, remember that you can also now leave us a question or comment for the podcast by calling us at 801-669-8513. And just as a reminder, you guys, if you are getting value out of these episodes, please consider supporting the show by going over to whatever platform you're listening on and leaving us a 5-star rating and a written review.
Absolutely. So let's recap over the past two episodes because it's sort of been a theme here. So over the past 2 weeks, we've been talking about getting our needs met in our relationships. And so let's summarize. One, all of us have the same basic human needs, and we all generally want to help each other achieve those needs and live, a more wonderful life.
Right. But to connect in this way, where we enjoy contributing to each other's well-being, we need to avoid certain ways of thinking and avoid certain ways of expressing those needs. Otherwise, it makes it really difficult for others to want to help you. In doing that, avoid anything that sounds like a criticism, blame, like insults. And we need to avoid making our needs sound like they're a demand rather than a request.
Yeah, because nobody's going to respond very well to that.
Right.
We also talked about how all human emotions are really just indicators that our needs are not being met. Anger is one. So for example, anger itself is not bad. It's really just a signal we need to pay attention to that our needs aren't being met.
So today we're going to get more specific about how to effectively express our needs in clear and concise ways.
That's the hard part.
Because it's important, I think, in all of our relationships to be honest with each other. It's important that we have the kind of relationship where we're able to let our partner know when their behavior isn't meeting our needs and vice versa, right? And the beauty is when we're able to do this well, when we're able to do this effectively, we really have the greatest chance of getting everybody's needs met. This type of honesty, though, is only really possible when we avoid, like we said, words that criticize and presenting these requests as requests rather than as demands.
Yeah, we're going to get into that part later in the show.
We're going to dig really deep today.
So let's get into the weeds. So how do we do this? How do we specifically ask for what we need in an effective way without, triggering a fight, which can be problematic?
So there's a couple of core elements we want to make sure we do, right?
Yeah. So there's 4 crucial elements that are going to go into, we're going to call this having a compassionate request, right? And so let's list out the 4 elements and then we're going to go into detail. Step 1, or one of the first ones, is we need to be able to make clear observations. So just really seeing what's happening without attaching a value to it. So no evaluations or no judgments. Step 2, we must be able to honestly and effectively express how we're feeling, right? Express our feelings. 3, we need to clearly articulate specifically what we need during that moment. And 4, here's the hard part, we need to make a specific request without that request sounding like a demand or even coming off as abrasive.
Okay, so those are the 4 things that are so important, and we're going to break them down one by one, go through each of these. So
you're going to get some help because there's a lot here.
And we're going to give you a handout today. We'll tell you more about that at the end.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. So don't worry, we're going to put a lot of this in a handout. So the first thing Robert said is we need to be able to make sure we can make clear observations without mixing it with any sort of evaluation or judgment.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Maybe we can practice.
Yeah. So think of a specific thing. So we'll just role play this a little bit. So think of a specific thing your partner, I guess that's me, has done recently that you don't or you didn't like that you might want to talk to them about. And if you can't think of something that maybe your spouse did, then think about some other family member or maybe even a coworker. Okay?
Okay. So you want me to think about something
I
you
do.
did.
You got one?
I'm going to make up something from the past.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm ready. My partner is just so inconsiderate. Yeah, he's
Ooh.
just so inconsiderate.
Okay. But there's a little problem with that
Oh,
response.
there is?
Yeah, because that's more of an evaluation, right? Not an observation, right?
Oh.
So being inconsiderate is an interpretation or an evaluation of the behavior, right? So
Mm.
let's try that again. And what is something your partner's done recently that you don't like? And
Okay.
let's try not to make an evaluation of it.
Okay, let me try again.
Okay.
He does what he wants, but he doesn't think of how it might affect me or other people in his life.
Well, it's a little bit better, but it's still an evaluation. And then you manage to mix an assumption in there about what's going on inside of someone else's head. Like how do you know that he doesn't think about what might affect you? That becomes the assumption, right? So let's try one more time. And so what's the specific behavior that you don't like? And then can you do this without interpretation, judgment, or evaluation? Just tell me the specific behavior that you don't like.
Okay, I think I can do it this time. All right. When he comes home from work, he just sits on the couch and he just sits on the couch while I make dinner.
Yeah, that was close. You almost
I almost threw in an evaluation
you almost put
there.
in an evaluation or judgment there.
When he comes home from work, he sits on the couch while I make dinner. Was that neutral enough?
Yeah, so that's perfect. That's just an observation. It's what he does. He comes home and he sits on the couch while you make dinner.
Okay, I think I'm getting this.
It's specific. You didn't make any behaviors. You didn't make any assumptions. You didn't interpret that he didn't care or that he was lazy. You didn't make an evaluation. It was really good. That was just clear cut. It was just what he did, what was happening. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe I've done this before.
Yeah, you might have done this before.
So why are we telling you this? Why does this matter?
Because it's hard.
Okay. Well, it's doable though.
Yeah.
So being able to observe without evaluating is a really important skill because we need to be able to articulate our observations to other people because we want to tell other people specifically what they're doing and be able to help them to see how their behavior, good or bad, is affecting our needs, whether they're meeting our needs or not meeting our needs. And we need to be able to hear the same in return from our partner.
So what you're saying is it's important that both partners can make and share observations with one another, right?
Right.
In a way that also is not including this judgment or assumption or evaluation.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
This is one of the hardest things for human beings to do. In fact, Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti says that the ability to observe without evaluating is actually the highest form of intelligence.
Yeah, I wish that I was better at that.
Well, it's just practice.
Yeah, I think we're all taught to judge
better.
though, right?
I think that's part of our education system, to be honest.
It is, yeah. So let's do a couple more examples of observations versus evaluations. Example 1. Instead of saying you're not listening to me, which is what?
It's an evaluation. It's also an assumption because you don't know whether they're actually listening to you or not. I've said this to you so many times and you usually repeat back to me verbatim and I'm like, oh, you were listening.
I was listening.
Okay. So instead of that.
What clear observation could you make instead of that?
Okay. How about I can see that you're texting on your phone while I'm speaking to you. Is that a clear observation?
Yeah. Yeah. You see that. No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do another one.
All right. Instead of saying you always ignore me, which is also an evaluation, plus it has the dreaded always word in it.
One of our favorites.
What would be a clear observation for that instead?
So instead of
you always ignore me.
How about I noticed that during our conversation yesterday, you were checking your email and not responding to me.
Okay. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, good. So that was step number 1, which again was to make observations. Step number 2 is we must be able to honestly and effectively express our feelings.
Ooh, feelings.
Okay. So once we've been able to clearly state this observation, it's important that we then are able to share how this behavior is impacting us. we need to let them know, whoever our partner is, we need to let them know how our needs are being affected by their behavior or lack of behavior or whatever it may be.
Right.
But we need to frame it in a way that it isn't heard as a criticism, isn't heard as a judgment, or maybe some kind of diagnosis like, oh, you're such a narcissist.
Yeah,
Right?
that usually comes out. And as we said last week, this requires us to develop a vocabulary of feelings, which is not something that we come with, right? We have to work on that so that we have the language to tell people how we feel when their behavior affects us in a certain way.
Exactly. So, for example, feelings are things that you can feel. It's
Right.
like, when you think of it, can I actually feel this? Like, I feel sad. I feel irritated. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. These are all feelings.
Yeah. And this is so much different than the way that most of us were taught to communicate. Many of us were taught, especially guys, and I know that's broad strokes, but we're taught not to share our feelings or even show feelings, for example. And many of us were taught also, both men and women, that feelings are a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of hold that in, and we're not used to doing that. We're much better at sharing judgments than we are about sharing feelings.
Because it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And vulnerability equals, that's not correct, but a lot of people say vulnerability equals weakness, which is not true.
Right.
So, but what we want, if we want to be able to relate to others in a compassionate way, then feelings are a key ingredient. So therefore, we need to be able to identify, get in touch with, and then be able to share and articulate what those feelings are.
So sometimes when we're teaching this to our clients, they will say things like, I feel that he is wrong, or I feel that she is acting nasty. But these aren't feelings. These are thoughts, and they also have some evaluations and judgments in there. So we want to avoid them. Just because you tack the word I feel in front of it doesn't mean that you can, add a judgment, right? And so we just need to simply name our feelings.
And I think anytime I feel the next word is that, it's probably going down a slippery slope.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So ask yourself, in what way am I being impacted by this behavior? How is it actually making me feel?
I think that's a better question. Right?
Yeah. Good. So far, what we've been able to talk about so far is we've been able to clearly observe and then state neutrally what the other person has done. And then the next part, state how we feel about it.
Right. So the third element is of the request is we need to clearly articulate specifically what we're needing at the moment. And we live in a culture that often shames men and women, as we've talked about. It shames us for having feelings. And because of that, we lack the vocabulary needed to express our needs and wishes. This is why last week we gave you an exercise and encouraged that you all make a list of at least 9 or more basic human needs at your fingertips. So this is on your list so that you can always share those needs or at least reference those. We gave you some ideas such as sustenance, protection, affection, love, empathy, autonomy, creativity, and purpose. And those will fit oftentimes when you're looking for a need. It oftentimes will center around at least one of those.
Yeah. And so we've just talked about 2 different things. The first was feelings. The second was needs.
Yes.
And we talked about in both of those cases, we often lack that vocabulary because this isn't really the way we're educated to communicate. So I think what I'm going to do this week, Robert, I think I'm going to make a handout and I'll put it in the show notes. And I think it'll recap this episode. So we'll give some good examples in there, but it'll also have like a list of feelings and needs that people can read up on just to add it to their own vocabulary so that they can skill up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? This is some of this is actually what we do in our retreats as well. So we'll talk about, we actually go over these specific tools. So we're giving out this piece and it's going to be a great little handout for you to have in your back pocket.
Yeah.
All right. So what have we said so far? Well, when we ask for our needs to be met, we start with our observations, right? Then we share our feelings about how the other person's behavior impact us. And then we express our needs.
Perfect. So just make sure, again, that as you express your needs, just like we've said already before, that you're avoiding words like right and wrong, good and bad. This is appropriate. This is inappropriate.
Yeah,
you shouldn't have done that. You have to do this. You can't do that. Because again, we want to avoid demands and we want to avoid criticisms.
The fourth and final element of a request is we need to be able to make a specific request without it coming off and sounding like a demand. And this is probably the challenging part.
Right. And this is going to take practice.
Yeah.
So there's two really common mistakes we often make when we get to this point of expressing our needs. So either we miss this step completely and we don't make a request at all. We just sort of throw out there what we observed and assume our partner's just going to get it. They're going to read between the lines. They're going to read our mind and they're just going to know what to do. And then when they don't, we get resentful and mad and all those things.
Yeah,
Or
I'm so good at at assuming that someone will, read between the lines. Yeah. I always say like, oh, well, you probably shouldn't do that. And I never say anything about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, or this not having your partner read through the lines, or we aren't clear, like specifically about what we would like from the other person. So here's a couple of examples of these common mistakes. And one is, prevalent in my life as well. So Sharla.
Okay. So the first one is,
yeah.
Here's an example.
Yep.
I noticed that during our conversation yesterday, you were checking your email and you weren't responding to me. Okay. That's okay. That's good so far. That's an observation.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
I felt disconnected and disappointed that I wasn't able to share my exciting news with you.
Those are feelings. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. I shared my feelings.
Yeah.
And then I stopped. What's the problem there?
Was this actually from yesterday, from us?
I don't know.
No, it could have been. So the problem here that I see is like, well, you made a great observation, right?
Yeah.
And you shared how it made you feel.
Right.
Like,
good.
Right. This is what it was. And I felt, but I don't really know what you wanted from me.
Exactly. There's no articulation of the need and there's no articulation of the request. And we need to be clear. We can't just assume that our partner is going to infer what we want, what we need.
I think the hard part here is that we're just so used to not making requests. I think some people are really good at making requests in their relationship. And the rest of us are, I don't really know. And I'm that way. And so, as I talk myself through it, I'm asking like, why can't I be a little bit more clear in what I want? And I think this is an exercise that I've had to work on as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell me what you need, right? Tell me what you need for me to, help you.
Yeah.
So
okay, here's another example of what isn't quite a complete request. So here, we're going to continue with that last idea. So I noticed that during our conversation yesterday, you were checking your email and you weren't responding to me. Okay. Again, observation.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I felt disconnected and disappointed that I wasn't able to share my great news with you. Okay, good. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
Let's try this to add on. I don't want you to ignore me when I have something important to share.
Ooh.
Is that okay, or did I go off the rails?
That was a little stiff.
Okay, so what went wrong there?
Yeah, ignore, right? So when we look at the word ignore, that's a judgment.
Oh, okay. So it didn't really, that part I went off the rails and I didn't observe.
That was a judgment. And then you added an assumption to it, right? You had this, I don't want you to do thing, right?
So
instead of telling me what you do want.
That's interesting, right? I said, I don't want you to do this.
Yeah.
That was a problem.
Yeah. So when we're making requests, we want to tell people what we do want, right? Rather than what we don't want. Sharla's so good at this. She always say, tell me what you want instead.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, dang it. Right? So a better way to say that would be, hey, would you mind putting your email aside for later and listen to what I have to share with you, please?
Oh, that sounds better.
Because that's telling me what you do want, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for a request to be clear, we also need to know the difference between a request versus a wish.
Oh, okay? Wish. Yeah.
So a wish is something.
It's like a hope.
Yeah, it's a hope.
Yeah.
And a lot of people make this mistake as well, where they are wishing for something that they might want to have in this wonderful thing to happen in the future.
I wish he'd pay more attention to me.
Whereas a request is something specific that we would like to have done now. So if I had said, I'd like you to have more self-awareness about how your actions impact me, well, that's a wish, right? That's not clear. That's not saying specifically what I need from you, Robert, right now in this moment.
Right. And we also can't use vague language, which I'm great at. Like, I would like you to help me more. What does that even mean? Like, more what?
Mm-hmm.
More today, more often, how much specifically? Instead, we need to get specific. I'd like you to help me with this. I would like you to help me finish this task.
Yeah. So get clear, describe what we
Yeah.
need in the moment.
Right.
It's not only important that we make very clear requests and use very clear language, it's also very important that we present the request as a request and not as a demand.
That's where it can go off the
And
rails.
for sure,
Yeah.
which means you also, as a person giving the request, making the request, it means you have to get okay with the answer being no.
Yeah.
Because if it's a demand, then you're demanding a yes. But if it's a request, then your partner has the option to give you an honest response. Because if people hear, and this is important because if people hear demands, it takes much of the joy away from them doing the things for you that make your life better, that give them the joy and fulfillment in doing it. And if you remember, but 2 episodes ago, we said, what do you want your partner's reasons to be for doing what it is you request of them? Do you want them to genuinely help you because of the joy they receive from contributing to your well-being? Or do you want them to just take action out of guilt and fear and shame?
Yeah. So remember, when we present our needs as demands, it's also more likely to provoke resistance rather than cooperation. So be gentle, be kind, be polite, say please and thank you.
Good. Now, with many people, it is really hard to get them to trust that our requests are actually requests and not demands. And if you've been married for a while and you haven't been communicating in this way in the past, don't expect this to work the first time you use it.
It can take a little bit of work
Yeah.
for you and for both of you. One of you to trust that you can make a request, and for the other one of you to realize that you have to be okay hearing no and giving enough grace in that situation.
And remember, like, everyone carries memories of these past experiences that you've had. We've all had individual micro traumas. Maybe people have, or maybe your partner has received a lot of criticism, guilt, blame, and punishment in the past. So it might be especially difficult for these individuals to trust that this is actually a request this time and that they actually are free to say no.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just talk a little bit about, my childhood. I was sort of raised with somebody who was really great at manipulating people around them. And while it was oftentimes presented as a request, there would always be some sort of a consequence. And I know that people out there are sort of listening. So when people ask me to do things, for the longest time, I almost always just said no because, like, I don't know, as long as it was my idea, I felt like it was okay. But if I felt like I was being manipulated into something, I would just push back harder.
Right. Right. And so those past experiences really do shape whether or not I'm believing, whether I'm trusting that this is actually a request. So it might take a little bit of adjustment, and don't give up on this. Like, if you try it one time and it doesn't land, it doesn't work, go back, listen to this episode again, listen to it with your partner, and continue to try to develop this new, more compassionate way of communicating.
Yeah, and grab the download and work through those steps. So it's going to take some time and some assurances from both, you and your partner. And if you're issuing the request and it comes across as like maybe a demand, ask for feedback and say, could you tell me how I could make this, sound better? So it sounds like a request, not something that I didn't care about, or, coming across rough. That's not really what we want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great idea to just ask for feedback. Like, this is what I was trying to do, but I didn't mean to come across as though I didn't care about your needs in the process. So can you help me to restate this in a way that feels better to you?
Yeah, that's just that communication style is going to just serve both of you better.
Right. All right. So let's summarize everything that we've talked about in this episode so far. When we ask for our needs to be met, we want to describe what we're observing, share what we're feeling, and then explain what we need.
Right.
Then we can make clear requests as best that we can, so that the other people in our life, our partner, our friends, our family, so that those people in our life can actually trust that it really is a request and not a demand.
And if you guys are struggling with this, just remember, be patient. It takes time and it takes practice. And it'll take time for your partner to trust this new way of communicating, especially if this is a really big shift, in how you've been communicating and requesting things in the past.
So as we wrap up this episode, just a couple of final thoughts on expressing needs. I would say try to just forget about the idea of a winner and a loser. I think that mindset right off the bat gets us into trouble.
Yeah,
Forget
absolutely.
about who's right and who's wrong. Instead of trying to dominate or force or change the other person, forcing them to meet your needs, trying to shift them. Instead, how can you focus on expressing how your deepest needs in a way that's really constructive and really helpful?
Yes.
And again, grab that free download, look in the show notes, because we'll put some examples on there as well of some really good ways to make requests that follows this exact format.
Once again, we are so very grateful for all of you and just ask that you continue to support the show. The algorithm depends on your ratings and your comments, and for us to really make a much bigger impact, we really need your continued support. So if you haven't in the past, would you show us a little love by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment?
And more importantly, and as always, if there's someone in your life that needs help in their relationship and you think they might benefit from this episode or any of the episodes, would you kindly share this with them?
And as always, be kind to each other this week. Take care of each other. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest impact.
Until next time.